I'm Kim Gray, and I'm running to be your next mayor of the city of Richmond. My roots in Richmond run very deep. My grandfather, one generation out of slavery, started his own business as a blacksmith here in the city. I love this community. Every time I go outside, I feel part of the history. As your mayor, education will be my top priority. I will ensure that schools are fully funded, accountable, and provide a solid education for every child. I've worked for Governors Warner and Kane and was elected to the Richmond School Board and City Council. Our next mayor must restore community trust, enact meaningful reforms, and protect everyone from violence and intimidation.
Because every child deserves to be safe.
I know who my boss is, and that's the people of the city of Richmond. For real change, I ask for your vote November 3rd.
Hi, thank you for tuning in today, and thank you so much for submitting all of your questions virtually. This is a new environment we're working in, and we hope this will be informational for you as we look at Richmond electing its next mayor. We're 45 days out from this very critical election for our city, and the more we can be informed about candidates, the better. I'm Viola Baskerville, longtime Richmond resident and Richmond public servant. And so I'm really happy to be here today and have Kim Gray with me today. Kim, hello.
Hello. Thank you all who have taken time out of your busy schedules to join us today. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the loss that we as a country are experiencing, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Yeah, she was a giant, and we owe a lot of our progress on equity, inclusion, equality to the fights that she fought. And so we hope that all of you will in some way remember this giant today and in the future. And one of the ways we could remember her is to vote. And so we have a candidate here for election, and one of the things I want to ask is, why are you running for mayor?
Certainly. So I've spent the last 12 years of my life as a public servant, as an elected official, and the past 4 years have been very challenging. I want to overcome the corruption and cronyism and lack of common sense approaches to problem solving that we're seeing in City Hall. My focus has always been on community and community-based planning and building consensus. I started my journey in elected life as a school board member because children are, I think, the foundation for a prosperous locality, and making sure that we have sound education systems in place for our students and that children are safe and protected in their communities. And I also think commerce is important. If we want to pay for all of the amenities and to pay for great schools and modernize school buildings, we have to support our local businesses and make sure that they are thriving and generating the revenue needed to move us forward.
What would be some of your, or what would be your top 3 priorities if elected mayor? I think that's a very important question that's on the minds of so many as we go through such a changing time in our city.
So I think bringing about a better sense of community, restoring trust, and rebuilding that community policing model. We are coming out of a serious crisis with COVID-19. We have a lot of uncertainty about what the future holds. And I think that with the civil unrest, I do think there's a connection there. People are sensing a level of frustration and want to be heard by their government. So I think building community policing, community trust, community planning back into every aspect of what we do in City Hall is of utter priority. And also just as a parent of RPS students and as a community member who's working with thousands of children in our city, making sure that they have what they need in this virtual environment. We have hundreds of students who still don't have the computers and the access to the internet in order to engage in their classroom settings. So Those are top priorities for me. Reestablishing that dialogue in the community to assure safety and allowing for people to express themselves through protest and other means, to be able to be heard in a meaningful way.
Well, that's a lot to be thinking about and for voters to think about. And as voters go to the polls, there are several candidates running for mayor. What makes you different from the other candidates that are running?
So I think beyond my elected life, I've been a public servant for over 25 years, going on 30 years, and I understand who I work for, who my bosses are the people of the city of Richmond. I'm very accessible and responsive. I've been a homeowner in Jackson Ward for 27 years now. I've lived in Richmond my entire life, and I have a heart and love for all of our citizens and for our community at large.
Let's talk a bit about the recent, over the summer, civil unrest that we've had in our city. How would you go about moving Richmond to the other side of that civil unrest, and how do we start to rebuild trust in government?
So I think we have to engage and we have to have dialogue. I've always stressed process. It's what we have to do, and sometimes it's difficult conversations that we need to have, but if we don't allow that space and that opportunity for people to be heard and to have a dialogue, we can't move forward and we can't find common ground. What I find is everybody that I've met with and talked to wants the same things. They want to be able to provide for their families and a better future for their families. They want to be able to provide for themselves and not have to struggle. And we need to create spaces where dialogue can take place. We need to be able to foster those peaceful protests. I also think we need to address when people are crossing the line and not treating our businesses appropriately by vandalizing and looting businesses. What concerned me early on was that a lot of our historically black businesses were attacked in those early days, and I do draw the line there.
Let's talk a little bit about those businesses. How would you initiate or how have you supported and helped not only the minority businesses in the city of Richmond, but other small businesses? And then there's another piece to that. How do we as Richmond look toward becoming a very important or rebuilding our status within the region? And how do we work with regional partners?
So supporting our local businesses is key. With the taxing structure, especially in our restaurant industry, we put them at a competitive disadvantage. So one of my early focuses during the COVID-19 crisis and the restricted seating within our restaurant industry and the outdoor seating designs, that we put in place some assistance and grants to allow for those businesses to purchase the equipment, the PPE, and or the outdoor seating, and provide some help to those businesses who had to shut down rather abruptly and are hurting. We want to bring as many of our businesses back online so that they can be fruitful and successful, and that we can prosper together. So I initiated a program through my work on City Council to provide for grants. It expanded to all of our local businesses who were impacted due to COVID-19. We put that in place through funding we found through the EDA, and we now have CARES Act grants available to businesses. So one of the challenges that I've found with the way that these grants are being done, if you owe any late charges or penalties and interest on any business taxes, you are not eligible to receive those. And many of the businesses that I'm hearing from are just discovering that they may have missed a payment many months back and were never informed of that until they applied for these funds. So I think, again, we've got to get back to common sense approaches. I've checked out other localities, and they notify the taxpayers. There's an online system where they can see exactly what their status is. If there are any late charges or penalties, they would show on that screen when they interface with the locality.
Speaking about other localities and how they handle that particular situation, are there other specific areas in which we can adapt or look at what our surrounding counties are doing, and how can we move Richmond really in the direction that it needs to go?
So I've been working as a member of the Regional Transportation Planning Organization and the Regional Commission. We come together. There are 12 localities that come together, the Regional Planning Commission and the Transportation Planning. And what I hear from them is that our success is their success. They want to help us in any way possible. And where they may be successful in some areas, permits and inspections is one example, they're willing to offer their expertise and their ability to get things done more efficiently and support us in that. And I think that we need to accept that help where needed.
That permitting issue is a big issue in City Hall. What would you do as mayor to rectify that situation? People are having problems applying for building permit, construction permit, and then they have to take forever to get one. That
Right.
slows down growth in our city. And how would you rectify that situation if you're mayor?
So we've had not one, not two, but 3 audits. I serve on the audit committee as a member of the city council, and we have the solutions laid out before us. The number one thing is improving our technology. There have been multiple technology purchases, but we have not gotten our systems to where we are completely online. And what I've heard just this week is that there's a lag of 5 to 6 weeks before even payments are being processed. So there's also the issue of not prioritizing very simple requests fall in line behind very difficult requests. So you may have something that in another locality might take 15 minutes and it's just an administrative approval and you'd be out the door. Well, you're falling in line behind something that may take several weeks and you have to wait. So again, common sense approaches, getting the right leadership in place and making sure that we are making the best decisions for our customers, the citizens of our city and the contractors who come in to do business here. We're making the best decisions every day for everyone to move forward and prosper.
We've had a question that came in with respect to your relationship with the Richmond Police Department. As mayor, you are the executive leader of the city, and that oversees the Richmond Police Department. So how would you define your role and your relationship with the Richmond Police Department?
So within the district that I have been serving and have been honored to serve the last 3.5+ years, I am very involved in the community policing aspect. When I have meetings, I always have our police representatives there. I go to all of our civic meetings, and we have had great response, and we always have officers there connecting with the community, being made aware of what some of the challenges are block by block. We've got to get back to that community policing model that was very successful and under Rodney Monroe, who everyone loved here as our police chief. We've gotten so far away from that model that there seems to be a disconnect, and I think that leads to more challenges. If someone's in the middle of a mental health crisis and a response is called by the police to show up, and that individual has no relationship or connection, it escalates that situation very quickly. So I hear from the police that those are some of their most dreadful calls when they're asked to go out and do those welfare checks, and it's an unknown individual to them and an unknown situation. I do think we need to develop teams of individuals that includes social workers and mental health workers to work alongside our police and to be out on the ground, meeting with people, talking with community members, and really becoming a part of that fabric.
For those that are listening in today, tuning in today, you've been on council and on school board for a number of years, and that's always a good sign of expertise and knowing sort of the environment in which you're working. For those who are just tuning in for this election who may not be as aware of your accomplishments, could you outline some of the specific things that you've helped move Richmond forward? We got a lot of publicity with respect to renaming the boulevard to North Arthur Ashe Boulevard, but other examples of your accomplishments.
So I think one of the things that has, again, we have wonderful planning processes. I was served on the school board, and the last year and a half of my service on the school board, we worked very hard. I co-chaired the facilities task force. We worked with over 40 volunteers. We took several plans back to the community for adoption and arrived at an option 5, which would have cost about $560 million. Very doable plan. It required some tough decisioning on school consolidations and closures, but it also yielded the best results so that all of our students could be in a modern building a lot more quickly than piecemealing. And that was one of the things that made it easier for me to decide to run for city council. I wanted to be able to fund that plan through our CIP process, our capital plan. And once I got to city council, it seems that plan has gone by the wayside, and we've gotten back to this piecemeal school construction and wanting to rebuild every school, even when they're at very, very minimal capacity. And that's not going to get our children where they need to be in a timely manner.
Let's talk a little bit more about that issue, the schools moving forward and school building, school reconstruction moving forward. You're not going to be on the school, you're not on school board, you're on city council, you're looking to be the next mayor. Mm-hmm. How would you define your role as mayor with respect to our schools and the education of our children?
So if you're aware, the mayor took the school construction process and raised our meals taxes and decided to sell us on building 5 new schools. What we flash forward, what we ended up with is 3 new schools. 2 were not built because of wasteful spending. So I think really being able to tighten up the processes, the procurement processes, and make sure that we are being as efficient as possible with our spending. These schools are 30 to 40% more than their prototypes in surrounding localities, and we can ill afford to waste any money when we have so many children in need and so many inadequate facilities for our students. So that would be one of the main priorities, is making sure that we are efficiently building new schools, that we have a plan in place that is doable, that will bring all of our schools up to date. I also think on the academic side, there needs to be a level of accountability that we aren't seeing. We are at historic funding levels, $30 million more to our public schools. I supported that, but I also supported putting accountability measures in place. We are seeing worse results with more money being poured into the school district, to the tune of going from 20% dropout rates to now 30%. And that's unacceptable on every level. Our school pass rates are declining, and we've got to do a better job.
Let's talk a little bit more about spending. As mayor, you will oversee a budget. There was a lot of civil unrest with respect to the movement of the monuments in our city. How would you have handled that situation?
Again, I think process is key. I voted to remove monuments when City Council received legal authority to do that. We work through the General Assembly and the legal process. We're Dillon rule. We are not able to do things without direct, explicit instruction from the state.
Unless through charter.
Unless it's a charter change, which comes through,
or
again,
city regs.
Again, from the General Assembly. So once we had that authority, we didn't waste any time. July 1, we voted for removal. Our mayor had already made the decision to remove them and had started doing that prior to our vote. Spent $1.8 million, which is questionable to me, with a vendor that's not a licensed contractor in the Commonwealth. And that contract should have really, by all measures, cost about $100,000. So again, we have to go through our own rules and processes. That's what our country was built on, and making sure that we respect and abide by our own rules. We're never going to put ourselves above our own laws and rules of operation.
You talked a little bit earlier about the schools, so we've talked about that, and we've talked about the small businesses. Are there other issues that you think really need to be focused in on, and what would be those issues? We are going through COVID. People have challenges, both
Yes.
academically, both business-wise, both in their schools, but in their lives. And so when we look at our average Richmond citizen who is not getting a paycheck, how do you envision helping their lives?
So I think that being a net for our community members, we've been cooped up inside. There are a lot of mental health challenges that we're going to be seeing. We need to be prepared for that. Again, putting teams together to assist people when they're in depressed states or having mental health crisis. I also think that making sure that we can serve as a financial net when people are struggling. We have eviction diversion programs in place for people who've been out of work and are unable to pay their rent. I think that we need to be directing the federal dollars that we're getting as a way to support people in crisis. And we're going to see more and more issues as things unfold. So it's important to be on the ground and to be aware of what challenges people are facing, and to act as that net when people are in crisis.
One of the things that people realize if they've lived in Richmond for any amount of time is that we are right off Interstate 95, 64. The air quality is not always the best. In fact, a lot of our children have high rates of asthma.
Yes.
And we've also seen recent environmental studies that have looked at the living conditions in our city with respect to some neighborhoods being cooler than others,
Yes.
very heated, hot areas where there's no greenery, and there are other environmental issues that are impacting the health and lives of our citizens. How would you propose to create a healthier Richmond?
So I have not just proposed, I've been working towards that. And Scott's Addition, not just because of its growth, but because of the amount of concrete and rooftops, is one of the hottest neighborhoods in the city. It can be anywhere from 14 to 16 degrees hotter in the Scott's Addition neighborhood than some of the cooler parts of our city. And so it's important that we are planting trees. We've gotten hundreds of trees planted. We are increasing green spaces wherever we can, and making sure that I fought to get money in for a walking trail and a biking trail through our Scott's Addition area. I'm working with an initiative in the Carver community to have trees planted, and we partnered with VCU's Office of Sustainability to make sure they're getting watered so that they can grow and prosper and continue to provide fresh air in that community. And I think that's a model we can overlay across the whole entire city, especially in our public housing areas and where there's way too much concrete. Also with new developments, I'm at the table with the developers and making sure that they are aware of the cost savings that they can expect when they put a white roof on a building, build a green wall, and put more trees on their development. So having those conversations early on, connecting them with the resources, and making sure that we are setting those expectations early enough so that they can become a part of those projects is really important too.
Not all of our listeners or people tuning in today are going to be virtual, but they will want to know some of your answers and responses. What would you say to those who are tuning in today to take back home who have parents, grandparents at home? How do you propose to make the lives of senior citizens in Richmond better?
So we currently voted to increase our tax abatement program for elderly and disabled. It was at a $50,000 income level, which disqualified a lot of our seniors. We raised that to $60,000. I have had legislation on the table to defer taxes for our seniors who are in their homes and are on fixed incomes and are unable to pay tax increases and are pushed out of their homes and forced to sell. I'd like for there to be a program that allows those taxes to be deferred until that property is sold, so that they can live out their days and years in their home that they have worked so hard and invested in.
One of the issues that has been on the forefront in Richmond for the last year or so is the high rate of evictions in our city.
Yes.
A lot of people are not homeowners, but they rent, and they are at a crossroads with respect to being under shelter. So how would you propose to help our city or lead our city through these times when people are worried on a daily basis about evictions?
So what I've found is that a lot of our high rates of eviction are driven by our public housing communities. And one of the challenges there is that the rents are based on income. And if a person picks up additional hours in any particular month, they go back and say, hey, you owe us more money for this month. And I think that we need to restructure how rents are calculated within public housing so that people have a more stable way of looking at their budgets. It's hard enough to budget when you're working hourly, and if you pick up additional hours, being penalized and having to pay more for your housing can really hurt an individual and a family. So I would like to look at how our public housing rental rates are calculated and to provide relief for those families. I also think that stabilizing and incentivizing from the local level affordable apartments, and if we're going to allow for abatements, we attach them to a certain percentage of affordable units that are maintained for the life of that project and not just for short term. There are ways to accomplish that I think will be more sustainable than what we're doing right now, which is helping people temporarily pay rents when they're due, but they cycle and find themselves back in that situation. So I'd like to have a long-term plan. Yes, I think we need to help fill in the gaps, especially during COVID-19 and people's loss of employment, and being able to help them get back on their feet during this time. But a long-term sustainable plan that includes incentives for more affordable housing and looking at our public housing rates and structures and how people are treated in those developments.
Government is there to help people. Often people say, well, government can't do everything. How would you suggest that government reach out and partner with nonprofits? Is there a role for nonprofits in expanding services, expanding and helping the needs of our citizens, and how do you envision the role of nonprofits?
Well, I absolutely think that there's a space for partnering not only with nonprofits, but faith-based organizations and corporate entities to uphold. And that's what I did when I worked in the Warner administration. with some of our lowest performing schools across the state. We found creative and innovative ways to fill in gaps where the government might not be able to pay for resources. For instance, the computer shortage that many of our schools were experiencing, we had state agencies and corporate entities that cycled computers out at a very quick rate, faster than our school districts. And so very gently used computers would be placed in the hands of students who needed them. And I think those are some of the ways that we can foster good government and great partnerships with nonprofit and for-profit and faith-based organizations.
One of the things that that I saw this morning in the newspaper was Richmond's turning around and becoming a tourist town again.
Yes.
It was always known as a foodie town. We have unfortunately lost some of our restaurants. Hopefully we can regain them back in business. But tourism has always been at the forefront of Richmond's ability to track dollars. How would you envision Richmond as a tourist town? What does it need to do that it hasn't done? How can we use some of our historic spaces better? And how would you allocate funding for helping some of those historic projects bring tourism in the city?
So for me, I think being a lifelong Richmonder, it's more about not erasing our history, but embracing it and telling more of our stories. I think that there's a tendency to shy away from some of the terrors of our past and things that we may not always think are great to talk about. But I think it's important for us to talk about our histories and to memorialize those histories. That's why I push for the Forgotten 14 monument. That's an untold story that I never knew or learned about in our Richmond public schools. And
talk a little bit about that, Richmond 14. Some of our listeners may not have heard about that.
So 14 soldiers from the U.S. colored troops who won medals of honor because of their valiancy, and they fought in the Civil War, and they're credited for turning the Civil War around. They fought against one of the most vicious regiments out of Texas, and they held ground and really diverted troops from Petersburg, and then subsequently Petersburg fell, and they were awarded medals of honor for their valiancy, and I never knew about them. I actually started looking at some of the surnames of these Forgotten 14, and I found out that I knew some of the relatives of those individuals. So it's really still very real and very much a part of our history that I think our young people should know about, and especially young people of color in the city. They should be able to look up at faces that look like theirs, at names that they share with individuals, and understand that they're really a part of our history and our fabric.
Let's talk a little bit about, one of the characteristics. It's you're running for mayor, a female, also a mother. What does that mean? What does that mean to the voter? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to the city of Richmond? What does it mean to issues, public policy issues that are important to you?
I think it's really important to approach, as I did on school board. I approached every child's issue as if it were my own child, and having the heart of a mother and approach to policy making is important. To have compassion and care and concern for people and their challenges, and how they connect with our city hall and our government is important. Always approaching individuals at face value and really working in a compassionate and an urgent way. There's a sense of urgency. I think 8 years on the school board taught me I didn't have the luxury of telling someone I would get back to them in a week or so when their child was in need. So I think we need to have that sense of urgency when it comes to people and their challenges. Just this week, I've been helping unsheltered families find their way into temporary shelter until we can find more permanent solutions. But, you know, mothers and families on the street need to know that we're here for them and that they're able to find shelter just like everyone else, especially as we approach our cold temperatures outside. And it's getting more and more critical that we are addressing people and their needs from every single level. If I come to City Hall for a business license, it shouldn't take 2 to 4 days in order to accomplish that.
It's turning cold.
Yes.
You just mentioned shelter. One of the critical issues that we face right now is the COVID situation and our health. What's going to happen with respect to the, development of a vaccine? This prediction that it won't be ready until third quarter of next year.
Right.
We are seeing citizens continue to die. We're seeing people contracting the disease. What is your primary public health initiative as we look past November to 2021? And what would be your first 1 or 2 actions to reassure people in the city of Richmond that there's strong leadership in moving forward and handling the COVID situation?
I think communication is key, and making sure that people are aware of the resources available, making sure that we don't end up back in that shortage of PPE, personal protective equipment, that people have the hand sanitizer and face mask if they're going out into the community, making sure that we have ample supply of medical resources. I had the opportunity to visit the Emergency Operations Center in Henrico, and there's a tracking system in Henrico County that says every ventilator that's available, every bed that's available, and when they reach a certain percentage, the screen color changes. It goes from green to the caution to red, and they are tracking in real time and by census data where the cases and the outbreaks are happening. I also think contact tracing is key. So if we have an outbreak, that we are able to circle back and make sure that we are addressing anyone who may have been exposed to COVID-19. So from that perspective, I think following our medical leadership and making sure that we have competent folks who are telling us what the trends are and where we need to be going with resources and with information, and sharing that information with individuals.
Earlier you made a statement with respect to Richmond being a Virginia being a Dillon Rule state.
Yes.
Should you become mayor, how do you envision working with the General Assembly, working with the governor of the Commonwealth, to make sure Richmond gets the resources it needs to do the types of things that you mentioned with respect to COVID, having the PPE, having all of the needs and things needed for our schools, because we do look at the state's budget for funding for our schools. How do you envision working with the governor and the General Assembly?
Well, I've been a continuous advocate in the General Assembly. When I worked for Governors Warner and Kane, I worked on policy issues within the General Assembly. I had a stint as a lobbyist working on important issues like public television and supporting the Girl Scouts. So I would continue, and as a school board member, we had annual legislative sessions with our Richmond delegation, and as a council person, the same thing, working not just in the room on that date, but the days leading up to our legislative session and agenda setting, working one-on-one with our respective representatives to find common ground, to work towards receiving more pilot funds, that's payment in lieu of taxes. We have so many state-owned properties and buildings that we relinquish real estate taxes for. I really would like to see the amount of compensation increase, because that's more money that we could use to support our children in schools and our infrastructure. So those are things that I will continue to do as mayor.
At the beginning of the show, I said we have 45 days out from the election.
Yes.
What are the critical things you want the viewers today to know about your campaign, you, why you're running, if they're on a fence between you and another candidate? What puts them over that fence to support you, and what can we expect in a Kim Gray administration?
I am hardworking. I spend 12 to 14 hours a day on an average day working for our citizens and the betterment of our city. Experience is needed. We can't have on-the-job training with the crisis of the potential financial crisis we're in, and the fixes that are needed rapidly to happen in City Hall. I am a lifelong Richmonder. I'm here to stay. I'm committed to this job, and I'm committed to making sure that Richmond is the best Richmond it can be.
Well, I think that is about most of the questions that we had turned in today, and I want to thank the viewers for submitting those questions in advance. I want to thank you for being with us today, and we hope that that people will vote early. I mean, voting early started on Friday, so so people have the opportunity to vote early in person. They also have the opportunity to ask for an absentee ballot. This is important. The national level is important as an election. It's important that the local issues and your local candidate is also supported, and that you make the best informed choice for mayor. I want to thank Kim for being here today and answering the questions that were sent in by the viewers.
Thank you for moderating, and thank you all for staying with us and sharing your time today with this virtual event. And I'm running to be your next mayor of the city of Richmond. My roots in Richmond run very deep. My grandfather, one generation out of slavery, started his own business as a blacksmith here in the city. I love this community. Every time I go outside, I feel part of the history. As your mayor, education will be my top priority. I will ensure that schools are fully funded, accountable, and provide a solid education for every child. I've worked for Governors Warner and Kane and was elected to the Richmond School Board and City Council. Our next mayor must restore community trust, enact meaningful reforms, and protect everyone from violence and intimidation.
Because every child deserves to be safe.
I know who my boss is, and that's the people of the city of Richmond. For real change, I ask for your vote November 3rd.